Hey, future diplomats, and welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Always a pleasure to be back.
You know, if you're gearing up for the UPSC, especially with international relations as your optional subject, you've probably come across a name that just sends shivers down your spine.
Oh, yeah.
Thomas Hobbes.
Yeah.
But let me tell you something.
Right.
Understanding his work, it's not just about, ticking off a box on your syllabus.
Right.
It's about gaining a powerful lens to view the world.
Absolutely.
And that's why we're here today.
Okay.
We're diving deep into the mind of this philosophical heavyweight.
Yeah.
To understand why his ideas are still so incredibly relevant to global politics, even centuries later.
It's fascinating. You know how Hobbes's work is like this secret weapon for acing that IR paper?
Oh, tell me more.
It's like it provides a framework to understand how states act on the world stage,
I like that.
what conflicts erupt, and really what motivates global leaders.
Right. And our source material today is all about Hobbes's life and philosophy.
Yeah.
And I'm already seeing how his ideas can help us kind of decode these real-world situations.
Definitely.
But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's set the stage.
Right.
Let's rewind back to 17th century England.
Okay.
Now imagine political turmoil, civil war,
Right.
a constant sense of uncertainty.
Oh, yeah. It was a time of immense fear and upheaval.
Yeah. And, speaking of fear and upheaval, Hobbes himself had quite a dramatic entrance into this world.
Oh, really? How so?
He was actually born prematurely because his mother went into labor when the Spanish Armada threatened England.
Wow. Talk about being born into chaos.
Right. I mean, that kind of sets the tone for his entire life. And, it's really no surprise that fear and that need for security became such central themes in his work.
Oh, absolutely. It's like his worldview was shaped by the instability that he witnessed all around him.
And that leads us to his most famous masterpiece,
Okay.
Leviathan, published in 1651. Now, this book wasn't just some academic exercise.
Yeah.
It was Hobbes's attempt to actually offer a solution to the chaos and violence he saw all around him.
Makes sense.
So walk us through it. What was Hobbes's big idea?
Well, he proposed a pretty radical solution.
Okay.
An absolute sovereign, a powerful figure he called the Leviathan.
The Leviathan, okay.
Think of it like an ultimate authority figure whose job it is to keep everyone in line
All right.
and prevent society from basically descending into anarchy.
So kind of like a global referee almost.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm with you.
Yeah.
But isn't that a bit extreme, though? Giving one person or one entity that much power, that seems a little risky.
It's where the debate comes in, right? Okay. Even today, the idea of absolute power as a necessary evil for the sake of order, it's hotly contested. And this is something, any UPSC aspirant should really consider. Like, does the need for security ever justify this unlimited authority?
That's a good question.
And if not, what are the alternatives?
Ooh, that's a question for the ages.
Right?
That's going to keep me up at night.
It could fuel a whole seminar, let alone this conversation.
Totally. But let's bring it back to Hobbes for a second.
Okay.
Why did he think that this Leviathan, this absolute sovereign, was so necessary?
Oh. Well,
did he have like a particularly grim view of human nature?
He did. He had a pretty pessimistic view of human nature.
Okay.
He believed that fundamentally human beings are driven by self-interest and this constant desire for power. And in the absence of a strong authority, he argued these drives would lead to what he called
here it comes.
The war of all against all.
The war of all against all. I've heard about this.
It's a pretty bleak picture.
So basically, without rules, without somebody to enforce them,
yeah,
he thought we'd just be at each other's throats constantly.
Essentially, yes.
Okay, so paint that picture for me then.
All right, so imagine this state of nature. No governments, no laws, no social structures to speak of.
Wow.
And in this state, life would be pretty rough.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Hobbes actually described it as solitary, poor, nasty, brutish, and short.
Wow, that's a pretty bleak assessment of humanity.
Yeah. Not exactly a party animal.
It doesn't sound like a fun time, but I mean, I could see where he's coming from.
Right.
Given, the turbulent times that he lived in.
Absolutely.
But how does this connect to international relations?
Well, think about it this way.
Okay.
Hobbes' state of nature isn't just about individuals. You can apply it to interactions between states.
So interesting.
In the international system, there's no global government with absolute power to enforce rules.
Right. It's kind of like everyone for themselves.
It's a bit of a free-for-all.
So states are kind of like individuals then.
Yeah, in a way.
In this Hobbesian state of nature, just driven by their own self-interest.
Exactly.
Always vying for power.
That's where the security dilemma comes in.
The security dilemma.
One country builds up its military. They just want to feel safe, right?
Right.
But then other countries start feeling threatened.
Makes sense.
Which leads to an arms race and increased tensions.
Oh, yeah.
Sound familiar?
That sounds very familiar, unfortunately.
It's Hobbesian thinking playing out on a global scale.
Wow. I see the connection now.
Right.
It's like Hobbes gives us this framework for understanding why international relations can be so messy and so unpredictable.
Yeah, you get it.
All right, so we've got this chaotic state of nature, both on an individual level and on this international level.
Right.
So how do we escape this mess?
Well, according to Hobbes, the only way out is through a social contract.
Now, this is where things get interesting. Can you break down what Hobbes meant by this social contract?
Sure.
It sounds like some sort of philosophical agreement.
It is. It's this idea that individuals voluntarily give up some of their freedom, some of their autonomy, to a sovereign power in exchange for protection and security.
So we're basically agreeing to follow the rules to avoid that chaos of the state of nature.
Exactly. It's a trade-off, you could say.
A trade-off, okay.
You sacrifice some individual liberty for the greater good of peace and stability.
Interesting. And this isn't just theoretical, right?
Not at all.
I mean, we see this in action every day.
Right.
You know, we live in societies with laws, police courts. These are all manifestations of this social contract.
Yeah, think about it.
And it's not hard to see how this concept applies to international relations as well.
Right.
Right. We have things like the UN international treaties, global norms.
Exactly. All attempts to create some semblance of order and cooperation in a system.
That is inherently anarchic.
Yeah, you're getting it.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But I feel like we've just scratched the surface of Hobbes' ideas.
Oh, yeah. There's so much more to unpack.
There is. So we've established that Hobbes, you know, he had this kind of dim view of human nature and saw this need for a really strong sovereign to prevent chaos.
Yeah, to keep things in check.
But how did he actually envision this sovereign working, like, in practice?
Right.
What did this Leviathan actually look like?
So for Hobbes, the form of government itself wasn't as crucial as the principle of absolute sovereignty.
Okay. So it's less about the structure and more about the power.
Exactly. He argued that whether it was a monarchy, an aristocracy, even a democracy, the key was for that sovereign to have unchallenged power, to enforce the laws, and maintain order.
So it wasn't about the specific type of government.
Right.
It was more about just concentrating that power.
Yeah, centralizing.
In a way that could prevent, you know, society from
going back to that state of nature.
Falling back into chaos.
Exactly.
I can see how that could be a pretty controversial stance, though.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially for, you know, those who value individual freedom and democratic principles.
Yeah. It raises some big ethical questions, you know, that are still debated today.
For sure.
But remember, we're trying to understand Hobbes' logic here and how his ideas influence political thought, especially in international relations.
Okay, fair enough. It's about understanding the framework and then evaluating it.
Exactly.
So if this sovereign's power is absolute, what's to stop them from becoming a tyrant?
Right. A classic concern.
Did Hobbes address that at all?
He did. He acknowledged the potential for abuse of power.
Okay.
But he argued that the alternative, a return to that state of nature,
the chaos,
that chaos and violence was far worse.
So it's a lesser of two evils kind of situation.
That's one way to look at it.
Accepting the risk of tyranny.
Yeah.
In exchange for some security.
Exactly. For order and stability.
That a strong sovereign could provide.
Right. And this line of thinking, you know, it resonates with some arguments made in favor of strong central governments, even authoritarian regimes sometimes.
Right. And I can definitely see how this could be applied to analyze situations where states might prioritize security over individual liberty.
Especially in times of crisis.
Especially in times of crisis, right?
Or conflict.
It's about understanding the trade-offs.
Exactly. The motivations, the trade-offs.
That states have to make.
And that's what makes Hobbes so relevant for someone studying IR, especially for the UPSC.
It's like a real-world application of these ideas.
Exactly.
Okay, but let's back up for a second.
Right.
We've been talking about this hypothetical state of nature. But did Hobbes ever give any real-world examples?
Yeah, he did, actually, to kind of illustrate his points.
Tell me more.
He drew on historical events,
Okay.
observations of human behavior to support his arguments. For instance, he pointed to the English Civil War.
Of course.
Which he experienced firsthand.
Yeah.
As evidence of these dangers of unchecked factionalism and the breakdown of order.
So he's basically using the turmoil of his own time to say, look, this is what happens when there's no authority to keep things in check.
He saw that chaos and violence as a stark reminder of what could happen when there's no one to enforce the rules and maintain peace.
It's like he's saying, I've seen it.
Right.
And you don't want to go there.
Exactly, a warning from history.
And he argued that this same logic could be applied to the international realm.
The world stage.
So he saw the potential for like a global state of nature.
Right, a world without a global sovereign.
Where states are driven by
pure self-interest, vying for power.
Potentially descending into conflict and chaos.
Exactly. And he believed that the only way to kind of mitigate that risk was through some kind of international order.
Okay, so treaties, alliances.
Right, those kinds of things.
A global sovereign power.
Or maybe even that.
It's fascinating how these ideas from the 17th century can still be applied to the challenges we face today.
Right. It's the enduring power of his work.
Yeah.
The specific context might change, but those fundamental questions about power and security,
they remain relevant.
Okay, so we've talked about the state of nature, the concept of the Leviathan.
The big guy.
The big guy.
Yeah.
The social contract.
Right.
But how did Hobbes actually see human beings fitting into all of this?
Okay.
Did he think we were just all inherently selfish and power hungry?
Well, he did have a pretty pessimistic view of human nature.
Okay, so not exactly a warm and fuzzy guy.
No, not really, but he argued we are driven primarily by self-preservation and the pursuit of power. But he also recognized that we are capable of reason and cooperation.
So it's not like he thought we were all just destined to be, warring savages.
No, he acknowledged our capacity for entering into social contracts and creating systems of order. So there's some hope for humanity.
There is a glimmer of hope.
But he did believe that this capacity was often overshadowed by, our more primal instincts.
Those baser instincts.
Especially in the absence of a strong authority.
Right. Someone to keep us in check.
So it's almost like we need that Leviathan.
Yeah, in a way.
To keep our worst impulses under control.
Exactly.
So that we can actually function as a society.
That's a good way to put it.
It's like civilization itself is only possible because of these constraints imposed by a sovereign power.
For Hobbes, the Leviathan wasn't just a necessary evil, but a force that allows us to live more peaceful and productive lives.
Interesting. It's a different perspective.
It is.
I'm starting to see how Hobbes's ideas can really be applied to analyze a whole range of issues.
You can see the connections.
From domestic politics to international relations.
Absolutely. And that's why it's so valuable, for anyone studying IR.
For those UPSC aspirants. So while we might not agree with all of Hobbes's conclusions, we can't deny the impact that his ideas have had.
Absolutely. A huge impact.
On political thought and the way we view the world around us.
For sure.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
But we've only just scratched the surface of Hobbes's philosophy.
It's a deep well of ideas.
It is. So we've explored Hobbes' ideas about human nature, the social contract, that need for a strong sovereign.
Right, the Leviathan.
But I'm guessing not everyone was exactly thrilled with his, let's just say, authoritarian leanings.
You're right. Hobbes' work sparked controversy from the moment it was published.
I can imagine.
Critics argued that his framework just concentrated too much power in the hands of the sovereign, leaving very little room for individual liberties.
Or checks and balances.
Right, those safeguards against tyranny.
So it's like you're trading one problem for another.
Right out of the frying pan into the fire.
Exactly. So how did people respond to his ideas?
It was a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Some people saw him as this brilliant political theorist, someone who offered this pragmatic solution to the problems of his time.
They're like, Hobbes, you get it.
Exactly.
Others saw him as kind of dangerous.
Right, an advocate for absolutism.
I can see how his work could be interpreted in different ways.
Absolutely.
Depending on your perspective.
Right, on that balance between security and freedom.
But what about Hobbes's relevance to international relations?
Yeah.
Are his ideas still debated today?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Hobbes' work has had this profound and lasting impact on how we think about IR.
Give me an example.
Like his concept of the state of nature.
Okay.
It's often used to explain the competitive and anarchic nature of the international system.
So even though there's no global Leviathan, that idea that states are always kind of
jockeying for position,
vying for power and security without that higher authority.
Right. It's still a valid way to look at things.
That's pretty powerful.
It's a powerful concept.
It helps explain, things like alliances, military buildups, power struggles.
Why we see those patterns repeating.
And why cooperation can be so difficult.
On that global scale.
Hobbes gives us that lens to analyze.
It's a framework for understanding
those complex interactions.
Then for UPSC aspirants, this is crucial.
Okay, tell me more.
Being able to apply those Hobbesian concepts to real-world situations.
So like analyzing a conflict.
Exactly.
Explaining a country's foreign policy decision.
Right, it shows you really get it.
That depth of understanding.
That's what they're looking for.
It's not just about memorizing facts.
No, it's about application.
It's about using the framework.
To
think critically.
Exactly.
Okay, future diplomats, listen up.
This is important.
This is how you impress those UPSC examiners.
Show them what you know.
All right, let's say you're in that exam room.
Okay.
And a question pops up about the South China Sea dispute.
All right, a classic example.
You could just list off facts.
Yeah.
Or you could wow them.
Right, bring in Hobbes.
By analyzing the situation through that Hobbesian lens.
Talk about the absence of a global sovereign.
Right.
How that allows states to assert those claims.
Leading to tension.
And potentially conflict.
A whole different level of analysis.
It shows you can connect the dots.
So even though Hobbes was writing centuries ago.
Right, a different world.
His ideas can still offer those valuable insights.
They're timeless in a way.
Into the challenges that we face in international relations today.
It's amazing, isn't it?
We've covered a lot of ground today.
We have.
From Hobbes' life to his ideas.
And their impact.
It's been a fascinating deep dive.
I've enjoyed it.
Into the mind of this really influential thinker.
One of the greats.
And for all you UPSC aspirants out there, remember,
listen closely.
Understanding Hobbes is like having that secret decoder ring for international relations.
It unlocks those complex dynamics.
It helps you make sense of it all.
And ace those exams.
Ace those exams.
Maybe even change the world one day.
Who knows?
The power of ideas.
Before we wrap up, a quick reminder
to
like this episode.
Hit that button.
Subscribe to The Deep Dive.
For more great content.
And share this with your fellow UPSC warriors.
Spread the knowledge.
We'll be back soon with more thinkers, more ideas, more strategies.
Stay tuned.
To help you conquer the world of international relations.
We'll be here.
Until then, keep those minds sharp.
And those ambitions high.
We'll see you next time.